It is a period of relative peace and prosperity in the galaxy. Not so much in the Star Wars fandom. However, we are some 100 years from the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. Welcome to Fantha reaction chat for episode 4 of the Acolyte, entitled Day. So last week we spent a episode in flashback learning more about May and Osha's kind of relationship with their mother and learning all about the thread and some fantastic witchy chants and stuff. This week we're kind of back into the present and we're now on Kofar, which is what we saw at the end of episode 2 with Kalnaka. So joining me this week is Mr. Mark Newbold. Mark, how you doing, buddy? How's things?
I'm very good, and I'm very much looking forward to talking about this episode.
Me too. So go on then, off of the bat. What were your thoughts? What did you think of episode 4?
First observation is it's not the longest episode in the world, but I don't mind that one bit because it felt like the whole episode, and this isn't a negative, it's just an observation, was very much leading up to that final sort of 3 or 4 minutes as they arrive at that culmination of the things you've kind of seen as they're traipsing through Kofar to get to where they are. You followed May and you followed Kamir, and then you're following the Jedi team and they're working their way towards it. So all of that was very cool. I liked a lot of the character stuff as well, which we'll get into, obviously. May kind of has a change of heart. Kamir is a bit, not sure if that's the right idea, sort of attitude. You see a little bit more of Sol's relationship with Osha as well, which I like. So there's lots of things that I really did enjoy. But I think the big takeaway, in the same way that Ben Quadraneros and Therm's Scissor Punch were like the flavour of the week, I think Basil is going to be the star of this episode for sure.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, he was amazing. Yeah. Such a, I mean, kind of like such a Star Warsy character, because he didn't feel like completely fresh and new, as it were. It kind of felt like he just belonged in that universe. And I thought the acting, whoever's portraying him, was like, did a fantastic job.
It's Hassan Taj, who was inside R2D2 in Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, so well done, Hassan, because yeah, he was awesome, So, and I just like the whole kind of the language thing, and like how Yord was like, everybody's focusing on learning like Shirok, I'm going for something a little bit more elegant, and it's just like, yeah. I mean, one thing I did notice in this episode, I don't know if you did, but there was a tonal shift, and for the most part, it felt they're like a little bit more kind of like banter, a little bit more like light kind of comedy, kind of like reaching in and that, some visual gags about, like, for example, Osha's kind of like, don't make me wear that like civilian robe thing, and then you kind of cut to her and she's wearing the civilian robes. I mean,
yeah.
And this is a thing actually I noticed in this episode, and again, it's not necessarily a criticism per se, because I think there's enough originality in there, but there's definitely some kind of like tropes and some beats I'm just like, yeah, saw that coming. Like when she kind of touches her hand on that kind of massive centipede type cockroachy thing. And it's like, well, that's going to happen, I mean, and that's not a Star Wars trope. That's just like action adventure kind of thing. It happens in everything. So, but it just felt a little bit kind of telegraphed and stuff. And again, and unless again, we see something next week, there wasn't really a massive payoff with it, I don't think. And I think probably they might just be sowing the seeds with something maybe next week's episode.
It did feel, when you saw Osha in the first episode, when she's doing the mech neck stuff, she seems very capable, very well traveled. She knows her stuff. She's quite savvy. That was my opinion, or my impression rather, of her from the off. And May is very focused on what she's trying to do. We've already seen in the very first episode taking out Indara, and then later on taking Torbin out in the second episode. So in this episode, she did seem a little bit, and maybe, like you say, it's a tonal change, but it's also a character change in the terms of the relationships with the other characters. In this one now, Sol puts a bit of pressure on her. And when she's asking questions, he doesn't say no to any of the questions. He's very honest in giving his answers. There's no sort of obscuring stuff. She is going willingly. If she'd have said no, I don't want any part of it, like she'd said to girl with the horns, come blank on the name, Jackie. When she said to Jackie after she was training with the Bokkans and doing the Jedi training, I need to go. I can't do this. You guys need to deal with May. I can't do it. I think if she'd have said that to Sol, he'd have let her go. He wouldn't have forced her to stay. But the way he asked her, it's her choice. So yeah, but when she was with them, there was a little bit of, like you say, touching the creature was a bit. That's a bit of a rookie thing. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, it led to a cool scene. That creature looked fantastic. So there was definitely some old school Marvel vibe about that thing flying through the trees. I did like that, and it gave Sol a moment. So you've got to, I suppose, you've got to have these little moments because it is fairly
Yeah.
sedentary, that episode. It's not, there's not a huge amount going on, is there, until you get to the end.
It's a, for the most part, it's kind of like a semi-expositional walk and talk kind of
Transitional.
episode. Yeah,
Yeah.
it very much is a transitional episode. It's kind of like, it feels like, yeah, this is like just the next building block to the, like, you know, the next thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we get with the payoff really at the end of the episode. And again, it kind of did feel very much, partly maybe I'm reading more into it because it, you know, it's I've read the High Republic, but it didn't feel like anything that didn't wouldn't fit in the High Republic. That whole kind of thing. 8 Jedi go onto a planet and have a wander around and walk and talk, and
Yeah.
that's basically all they do, and then they meet a big bad at the end. You know, so um, who I'm going to call Darth Zippy.
Yes. Yes. Same. People keep calling him Darth Teeth, like the Muppet character. I'm
Yeah,
like, no, that's
no,
Zippy. Come
it's
on, anybody
Darth
who's
Zippy.
it's Darth Zippy. No,
Yeah,
no doubt.
and I think it's fairly precedent that actually Showmasters announced that Zippy's going to be at London Film Comic Con next
I
weekend.
saw that. I
So
couldn't believe it. So
I wonder if they know something.
I think so.
Yeah, yeah,
That's genius. Yes, I do spot
yeah.
that. Yeah.
So I mean, it was cool, and we had a Kaede Monday kind of cameo, which is
Yes.
interesting. You know, it's kind of like put a few noses out of joint for those who have you know, steeped in EU legends and stuff. But I mean, it's kind of like a familiar face, but not like too on the nose. So I think it kind of works. I think. What did you make of it? You know?
It didn't it didn't worry me because, I mean, going off track slightly, when the whole EU stopping and legends and all that compartmentalization of all that stuff
Mm,
happened, I was not happy for a long time. I didn't get why they couldn't just give you an extra 10 years gap after Crucible, which is as far as they went up,
yeah,
and just carry on from there. And everything else is exposition. And if you want to fill it out, great. But then when you think of it from a business point of view, why would Disney spend 4.02 billion buying Star Wars to be told, well, you can't do that? It's in a book from 20 years ago. You can't do that. It's in a guidebook from 30 years ago.
yeah,
Oh, no, no, no. We've already told that story. Why would Disney want to do that? So
yeah,
Disney have gone, right, forget it. We'll just keep the original 6 movies and the Clone Wars, and everything else is fair game. We move that to one side. It's not like it hasn't happened before. It happened with the original Marvel run. You know, all of that was put to one side. So it's not the first time this has happened. It's the Matrix. It keeps regenerating. So that's no big deal to me, because nowhere in the Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, or Revenge of the Sith did Ki-Adi-Mundi state his age, or he's, hey, it's my birthday, I'm 70 years old. He never did that, you know. So it never happened. So if they want to make him 50, 100 years older than people thought he was before, to me, that's fine. That's not breaking law. That's not ruining anything. It's, if anything, it's given us some nice connective tissue to
mm.
stuff, you know, that we know. Because didn't we see in the background another Jedi from the Council?
I think Plo Koon was there.
Plo Koon was there. Nobody's mentioned that. So Plo Koon's there in one shot.
Yeah,
Ki-Adi's there. I'd like to go back to, I listened to the audio book of The Living Force, and I'd like to kind of want to go back to that now, have a thumb through the book and
mm.
see, because I know Ki-Adi was on the planet that was in that book way back when. So I
Yeah,
think maybe his age has already been predetermined in Living Force. I might be misremembering, so don't quote me on that. I'll go back and look and see. But nevertheless, didn't bother me. I thought it was kind of cool. And it was cool. It's Derek Arnold, who's done stuff on all the sequel trilogy films, and
yeah.
a lot of work on the Jurassic films. And yeah, I liked it. I thought it was cool. What about you? Do you enjoy it?
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those characters, isn't he? That like you know, he's. I feel like he is a perennial on the council, so you know, it's
Yeah,
good to kind of see a slightly younger version of him and that. And yeah, I mean, but this is it. I suppose it's just like we can't just expect that it's only Yoda who is around that time period. I mean, like Vanessa Rowe, she's in there from,
yeah.
and you know, and that's a nice kind of connective tissue, and that's a connection to the past with the High Republic. So we need
That's right.
those connections to the future. And I think, like I said, as with everything, balance. So as long as we don't kind of get Yariel Proof kind of like rock up next week's episode, followed by Yaddle or something, you know,
But what do you think of that? When we saw the earlier episodes, you saw
mm,
what seemed like some council members, and you see him in this one.
yeah,
But that didn't, to me, that didn't feel like the
it's
council
not.
that we,
No,
it's like a lower ranked. It's the
it's like a
Intercontinental belt,
department.
not the World Heavyweight Championship belt. You know what I mean? They're like
Yeah,
the next level down.
yeah.
So I think I think it's. I want to keep doing this. I think at some point you'll see Yoda and some of those council members that we know, but hopefully briefly and hopefully near the end.
Well, because that's a whole conversation, wasn't it? Because they kind of bring that up in their kind of discussion. It's like, do we need to let the High Council know about this? And we're like, nah, because it's just going to be a political nightmare. So, like, again, at that point, it's like it's quite interesting that there's these kind of seeds of like they've got to be aware of their political standing and their perception by not only the Senate but maybe even just the general kind of galactic public as well.
Yeah, yeah, because I guess, like you say, the High Council probably have to run everything past the Republic and the Senate and the bureaucrats and yada yada,
Yeah,
which only seems to get worse and worse and worse over the decades, doesn't it? So these guys are the more, they're not the Sarge. They're not the guy shouting behind the desk in Starsky and Hutch. These are the detectives on the ground, essentially, aren't they? They're
yeah.
the ones that are going out there and doing it.
That's what it kind of feels like. It feels like it's a regional office, so to speak,
Yeah,
and they're just dealing with their kind of their territory or whatever, which is cool. So we've kind of got really just kind of two stories kind of bouncing on in this episode. You've got May and Kimir who seem to be kind of taking the lead, and they're out in front looking for Kalnaka and kind of at first kind of like blush, I think like Kimir was kind of like he kind of just seemed like one of those kind of slightly greasy, untrustworthy underlings in the first couple of episodes. But this
yeah,
one, I'm starting to think there's a way, 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 way much more to him than meets the eye. Um, you know, could he be the actual like master or the person that May's trying to appease by doing these quests? Because she even says in during the episode that she's never seen his face.
yeah.
So what do you make of that? What's your thoughts?
My thoughts. I don't think there's only one. I don't think there's just one acolyte. I think he's
Okay.
another acolyte. I think they're in competition, but she doesn't know it yet. So
Mm,
I wonder. I think we'll at some point in episode 5, whatever they call that night, maybe. That you'll walk around the corner, or somebody will go, "Who's that yelling?" And you walk around the corner, and there's Kamir hanging
yeah.
from the rope up by his ankle from a Kofar tree branch. Still there. So I don't necessarily think he's the
So you don't
guy.
think he's Darth Zippy then?
I don't think he's Darth Zippy, because when you see May there and she's not May, sorry, Osha frozen, his red blade comes up
Mm,
and then he just does that and off
yeah.
she goes. If he's that, to me at this point, if he's that powerful and that strong, and he pushes those Jedi back as well, and because they're
Mm,
not ready for it, they're not expecting somebody with that level of power, you would
no.
imagine. So they're proper caught off guard, and different angles into the force, and what he's doing might be something they don't know how to counter or whatever. We'll find out next week. And what a great ending. And I love the hard cut as well, straight to the
Yeah.
credits. I love that. I love that. People are moaning about it. I think that's brilliant. But anyway, I think if he had that kind of power, he doesn't need to be pretending to be Kamir or whatever. Could be completely wrong, but I think Kamir is also one
You
of
think,
these
yeah.
acolytes. I just think back to the whole Karna Jax thing, with the Crimson Empire, when you've
Yes.
got all the Imperial Guards having to fight it out. And it's like, well, you're down to the last two, and I only need one.
Yeah.
And they've got to be ruthless. I think it could be a situation like that.
Yeah. Although I guess it's that whole thing, isn't it? Like sometimes, you know, what it's like. Your underlings just tell you what they think you want to hear. So kind of maybe getting to know her a little bit better and actually kind of trying to get her motivations over about,
Yeah.
it's only likely to happen when her guard's down and she feels slightly more comfortable. I mean, again, I'm obviously 99% sure that I'm 100% wrong, but
Yeah. Same.
but
Funny
Yeah.
enough.
But I'm happy for that to be wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of feels like, yeah, there's this. I'm still can't quite get my finger on what's going on between May and Osha, because it's
Yeah.
in this week's episode, it really didn't feel like they were both present at the same time in the same like space.
Yeah.
Originally at the beginning of like episode 1, I was like, oh, she's doing some force projection, and I didn't
Yeah.
think that through episode 2, and not necessarily from episode 3. But now I'm just like, again, is this a misdirect? Is this just them
Mm.
trying to kind of say, well, actually, you think you've got this show figured out, but actually you haven't?
I think there's
So
a lot of that going on, to be
yeah.
fair. I think a lot of people are jumping to unnecessary conclusions. But
Mm,
I take your point about this episode. It didn't feel like May could have walked out of the Kalnaka's cabin and gone up to Osha and gone, "Hey sis, what's going on?"
yeah,
There was that great moment when May's talking to Kamir and she's like, "I'm done. I know my sister's alive now. She's now my priority. I don't
exactly.
want anything to, and there's that moment. So it almost felt like I don't know whether you'd call it a face turn, like she suddenly found the right choice and whatever,
Yeah,
but
but
massively unresolved in her life, isn't it?
yeah, although it kind of, at that point, and again, it might just come down to this whole notion that we might only be seeing one side of like the story, but it
Yeah,
kind of feel like we had a massive like jump and change of heart for no reason at all,
yeah,
really. It
yeah,
didn't really feel like up to that point she seemed very kind of like unsure about whether or not she was going to do it and stuff. And I mean, again, I mean, cast my mind back to the trailers. I'm pretty sure that we saw like Kalnaka do some fighting. So we've
yes.
got to be
It's flashback
seeing,
stuff.
yeah, we've got to be seeing a flashback or something like that, because like again, it seems really disappointing that like we're seeing all these potentially cool Jedi and they just end up dead like that.
Well, I will say this week on Fantha Tracks we interviewed Amy Sang, who was one of the Sith witches, one of the witches, I should say,
Mhm.
in Brendok witches in last week's episode, and she's in episode 7 as well, and it's the
Okay.
same director. So it makes sense to me that that fight scene would be more flashbacks from what happened to May and Osha on Brendok
Yeah.
16 years before. So that kind of feels like it would fall into place.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a slight hypothesis about that, as a slight theory as to what it is.
Come on,
Okay. Well, so I think, based on what we saw Mother and Nancy, whatever.
Anasaya. Yeah,
Anasaya. I knew it was a combination between all three of them.
yeah.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah. Like she kind of like possesses Tolbin really quickly,
That's right.
and and he, I mean, his eyes turn black and kind of looks like he's. And I just wonder if maybe that's what happened. Like in that episode, she kind of like possesses him again, and he has to face off against Kalnaka, and that's
Yeah,
how they get the scar, and that's kind of maybe why they both kind of go their separate ways or something. I don't know. That's
yeah.
my little kind of
I say at this point, this is one of the things that's been used as a brickbat against the show that I think is great, because at the moment everything is hypothesis. We
yeah.
haven't got the comfort or the luxury of being in the OT or the PT or the ST eras where you kind of know the surroundings.
Mm,
You can throw in other characters or locations or plot points. There's nothing we can hang on
yeah,
to from this. It's all new. Maybe that's what's unnerving some people. It's completely fresh Star Wars. So I love the thought that I can hang on my theory that Kimir is another acolyte until next
yeah.
Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, and as we quite often are, and we've said it many, many times, be completely wrong and blown out the water. And I ain't going to lose a wink of sleep over it, because I'm going to
No,
enjoy chewing this thing over all week.
no. Uh, and neither am I going to storm onto social media and have a rant about it.
Yeah,
One
berate
way or
that
another.
newborn guy's an idiot. He got it all wrong. What do you know about Star Wars?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the thing. Like, but at this point, everybody's going like, "That's not how the Force work. That's not how the Sith work." And like, we had the whole episode
They're
last
not
week.
Sith.
Well, exactly,
Yeah,
was basically saying, well, some people use a Force, some people do this. We pull out threads, and the other
pull the
person
thread.
kind of
That's
like,
right. Yeah,
you know, I don't know, peels apples, and that's how they can use a Force or whatever. That's
yeah,
but it's just that you think about how even in today's modern era, how multifaceted religion is on
Oh
this
my
one
goodness.
planet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right. So to
yeah,
kind of like assume that at this point, before the Great Big Purge and stuff, that there is such a binary kind of galaxy when it comes to like force faith or and force
yeah,
sensitivity is,
yeah.
I think it's a little bit short-sighted. The problem is, and you know, I don't care in some respects. If people want to post about that, I don't have an issue with that. And if they want to kind of die on the sword for it, fine. But it's when they're proven wrong, and you can guarantee that 96% of like the everybody who's posting negative stuff will not actually kind of hold their hands up, go, I was wrong, I should have waited. They will find a way to try and spin it, So
And that's what I'm hoping, that if it continues, like I say, we've said this felt like a transitional
yeah.
episode. You're kind of moving from the first part. I mean, the first two episodes definitely their own thing, and the flashback fleshes that relationship out. And now we're moving beyond that to move to where obviously Kelnaka is, and we now know he's dead. And
Mm.
we can surmise that it was Darth Zippy that did it, but we're not 100% sure that it was him. It's probably Bungle. So no, Darth Zippy killed Bungle. What am I saying? It
Yeah,
was George. My God, it was George.
it'd be, yeah, Darth George. Yeah.
Darth George. So that's all. That's all as it is there. But as I say, next week now you're thinking, well, Venestra knows more. She's more. She's kind of becoming more. It feels like she's becoming more aware of what's going on, but she's kind of clouded because of Sol's relationship to obviously Osha and to May to a degree, but more Osha, of course, because she was his Padawan. And there, even there, when Osha's having the conversation with Yord,
Mm.
that was a little bit loose. I love the humor between Jackie and Yord. I think that's just so much fun.
Yeah.
But even with Osha, she's kind of finding her feet again in the whole relationship. I just think there's more. There's a lot more meat on the bone there as well.
I think so. I mean, I think we're still kind of starting to really see some of these relationships kind of like develop for one, and I
Oh yeah.
think, some of these will kind of galvanize when there's, something that they have to kind of like coalesce around. So I think that's going to happen, hopefully. And I mean, but my big concern is that, and it's not really a big concern because it's only me, but it's like, they kind of put again all this stock and all this kind of they put Kalnaka out front and center as like the cool kind of like Jedi, the new, look at the cool Wookiee Jedi. And I'm sure we're going to get him in flashbacks, but you just kind of go, well, that means that this character is now dead going forward. So if there is going to be a season 2 Acolyte, then we don't have this character, And I don't necessarily get the feeling that Leslie Headland is going to start resurrecting Jedi left, right, and center in the same way that we've seen in subsequent
You think
trilogies.
phase one of High Republic, when everyone thought Burryaga was dead, and then he came back for phase three, so
Yeah.
they won't do it again with another Wookiee. But I do like. I mean, Cavan Scott must be watching this, just
Oh
rubbing
yeah.
his hands together with glee, because it's Logan Greystorm died in Light of the Jedi. Was it Light of the Jedi? It was very early on, wasn't it? It wasn't quite
Yeah.
that early on, was it? But it was early on. Maybe it was that one, but it was early on. And so they set their template out that nobody's safe in this era because you don't know any of them. The only one that's getting out of this is Yoda. Come on,
Yeah.
everybody else is up for grabs, and it kind of feels like the Acolyte's got that similar
Yeah.
tone.
Which is refreshing, in
Yeah,
some respects, because you're not there, with your kind of your cork board when you bits of string trying to go, well, he has to survive because of this, and then she needs to do
yeah.
this and that. It's like you said, it's a fresh new era, and which is why it's quite nice to just kind of go in and just plonk it on the TV, just watch it, and then kind of go, can't actually wait to see how this resolves next week's episode, And in some respects, maybe it's because this will inform on the prequels, but it's not going to I don't think it's going to change how we perceive the prequels that much. I think it's
I
just
think
going
in
to
the grand
better.
scheme, yeah, I think you're
Yeah.
right. I think it feels like the. I mean, we've said this before. I think you said it that this could have been considered. I'd love it if you were right. It'll come out.
Yeah.
It'll come out in a book in like 10 years' time. But this feels like it was conceived more as a Knights of the Old Republic era story
Yeah.
than necessarily a High Republic story. And Lucasfilm and the creatives have gone, you know what? If we just pull this forward 2,500 years or
Yeah.
whatever,
We'll sell more
and
books.
well, yeah, Well, that goes back to the Legends conversation, doesn't it? Of
Yeah.
course, they're not going to keep those books from 30 years ago. They can write all brand new ones and cherry pick the best bits, which is exactly that's why you got Thrawn back. That's why you got all the other things back.
And then re-release those Legends books as Essential Legends collection.
Isn't it clever?
It's, you
It's
know,
like they're in business and trying to make money or something. Who'd have
yeah,
thought
they're
that?
not an entertainment company. They're just there to make money. They're not there to make things like for us to enjoy. It's for us to
Exactly.
consume.
Who decided to call this show business, eh?
Right.
But you know, I think there's a lot of things that could connect in a quite a cool way if they wanted to.
Yeah, exactly.
Pulling
So
forward to the prequels. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, again, the goalposts are, as much as they're fixed, they're also slightly changing now. They're moving around a little bit, which is kind of nice. If you can get on board with that, if you can't, well, then that's fine. Just stay, where you are. It's fine.
Exactly. If you can't get on board with this, if you think it looks cheap, you think it's badly written, you think it's badly acted, you don't like lesbian witches, whatever your thing might be, and that's not my opinion, but you know what I'm saying. Then hey, we've got Skeleton Crew coming at Christmas.
Yeah,
Just the show for you.
yeah,
6 young kids roaming around the galaxy, directed by the guy that made the Spider-Man trilogy. If you don't like this, you're going to love that.
yeah. And if you don't love that, well, then you've just got something else to moan about until Andor season 2 comes out.
Exactly. There's always something coming around the corner, and goodness knows,
Yeah.
us older fans, and there's a lot of similarly aged fans who are not gravitating towards it, are
Mm.
used to waiting months, if not years, for Star Wars stuff to come
Yeah,
along. So that's
exactly.
not a thing now. There's always
No,
something to buy.
exactly. And I mean, I also I know we've mentioned the legends a lot, but I mean, and I know it's slightly different on different scales, but you read some of those legends books, and you're just like, ooh, that was a tough read, because it
Yeah.
was just like pretty bad. And I'm not naming names because actually I know that one of my favorite books gets derided all the time, and I'm just like, that's a great book as far as I'm concerned, Children of Jedi.
I thought
Um,
you meant that. I thought you
yeah.
meant that.
However,
Yeah.
but it's just like, I guess
It
it's
could
what you,
happen.
yeah, but it's like, it's what you kind of get used to. I think,
Of course it is.
this is the thing, unfortunately, Star Wars is still disposable media, and you think about how many comics we've read, about Star Wars over the years, and
Oh,
how
yeah.
many really stand out. Probably about 10%, maybe if that, like that you could pull out of the air and go, that's exactly like, Crimson Empire, for example,
Mm,
and how many of those weren't necessarily just a reprint or a adaptation of a book, So
yeah.
it's, there's lots of stories, and not all of them necessarily have to be big hits. However, I mean, that aside, this is a kind of a massive tangent that I hadn't planned on going on to,
We
but
do this. We do this.
it's fine, So okay, couple of predictions then for next episode or next couple of episodes, Mr. Newmold.
Okay, so I'll stick to my guns and I'll say I don't think that Kamir is the big bad. I think he's on the side of the bad guys, but I don't think he's the bad guy.
He's not
And
the
if
final boss.
well said, he's not the final boss. And if he is, I'm hey, I'm all in. I want to see how that works. But I don't think that's who he
Mm,
is. As for May and Osha, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a reason the Force kept those two apart.
yeah.
And if they get back together, I can't quite figure yet whether they'll swing towards the good side or swing towards the bad side. Because when you see them as kids, May is definitely, she'd have crushed that butterfly if she'd have had the chance.
Yeah.
Osha just wanted to study it gently and let it go. They're kind of different souls. But I think when you put them together,
Well,
I
when
don't
you
know.
when you put them together, do you not have balance? And I guess it all kind of comes down to the whole notion of, if you subscribe to the Lucas theory that the force is only balanced when there's no dark side, or if you subscribe to the more logical in sense that if you've got light and dark and they're equal quantities and they balance each other out, and then in that case, is this when we start to kind of like wander down to the realms of Mortis and even like tie into what we see in the Acolyte and the Peridian Galaxy? And it's kind of like,
I mean, and it's okay. Yeah.
yeah, sorry, it's okay, so there's different ways that
Totally.
this could actually have an impact without it necessarily kind of derailing you know the original trilogy or the prequel trilogy, really.
And I think you're probably at a time now where there's more groups tapping into the Force, but it's always felt to me, and I've never read it. It's just my personal
Mm.
feelings on it. Is that the Force has gone like this in
Yeah.
terms of peak and flow, peaks and troughs, and sometimes it's more accessible and sometimes it's less, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's more accessible to the Jedi or more accessible to the Sith, because if the Force had always been more accessible to the Sith, they wouldn't have had to disappear for 1,000 years.
No.
So it does have its own sort of consciousness, I guess.
Well,
And
it's
hey,
current.
all that literally a current, and all those people. See, there's that word again. See, if Lucas had have come back and wanted to make a Star Wars film, we would have had that film about the midichlorians, which would of course been, well, a massive hit.
So we all. I think at that point, let's just leave it there, because I don't think I can really come back from that, because yeah, I mean, not without kind of start going down the realms of midichlorians and macro and micro and
There
everything
you
else.
go. Yeah.
So I think for those who have actually managed to hang on and stay listening to the end of this episode, thank you very much for doing so. It is appreciated. We definitely really could do with some thoughts and opinions. So whatever, it doesn't even have to be about the Acolyte. It could be about anything to do with Star Wars. Send us a question and we can answer it on next week's episode of Making Tracks. But
Yes.
until then, are we going to run in some pre-recorded end credits?
It's kind of what we do.
Let's do it. Punch it, Mark.